As we continue to celebrate our 200th episode, talking about one of our all time favorite movies, The Monster Squad, I couldn't be more honored or happier to be joined today by one of the stars of that film, and in my opinion, the definitive performance of Dracula on film. And I'm not saying that just because I'm about to talk to him. It is my great pleasure to speak today to Duncan Regehr. Duncan, how are you?
I'm doing well. Thanks. How about yourself?
I I am fantastic. Thank you so much for doing this. I got to be honest, it's so funny. Over the years, I've always heard people mispronounce your name, and I stressed about it so much. I had to watch like 4 interviews to make sure I got it right.
Well done.
So
I mean,
obviously,
over the
listen.
years, I've heard everything. I mean, it comes out, Regehr, bizarre. It's been, it's very interesting.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So a lot I want to talk to you about, of course, but I guess here we are in our 200th episode. We were kind of debating about like what we wanted to do, in terms of like celebrating and just kind of like doing something special. And we talked amongst ourselves and we said, I think it's time we finally review the Monster Squad because it's one of our favorite movies. It's a formative
Yeah.
movie for me and my co-host. Is it wild? Like you've done so much in your career, of course, but is it wild? Like this has such an endearing quality with fans all these years later.
Yeah, it still never ceases to amaze me that it became a kind of cult film very early on, actually. It didn't do that well at the box office to begin with, but people stayed with it. It's become cross generational in a way because we get you know people who watched when it first came out are now grandparents and their children watched it and introduced it to their children, so everybody watches it, and the body of the audience seems to get bigger every year instead of less.
I love
So
it. I
it,
love
it
it. So,
is a phenomenon, really.
absolutely. Let me backtrack with you because I've seen, the documentary, that Andre Gower did. I've watched the behind the scenes and things like that. But let me take
Well,
you all the way back to the. Go ahead. Go ahead.
just to interject that what Andre has done with that documentary has also increased the visibility of this particular film and encouraged the fans to expand in that way.
Absolutely, absolutely, and I absolutely loved it. It was so fun just to see everybody talking about that, and because again, as you said, this was not a film. Being honest, this was not a film that just took off and did bonkers at the box office. It took a few years, and now
Yeah.
I know that Fred Decker said he doesn't like to use the word cult classic, but this is a cult classic. Like this is a film that just lives with generations of horror fans and just fans in general. But again, it didn't find its audience right away.
No, that's true. That's true. And it is a cult classic. I mean, that's what it is. I guess that's the category that it would fit into. I don't know what other category. I wonder which category Fred would think it would go in, or maybe he doesn't think there's a category for it.
Yeah, absolutely. So let me
He's a
let me
great
start
guy.
back at yeah, let me start back at the beginning in terms of like casting because I again watching that documentary, Fred was talking about because he had been kind of inspired by the whole Abbott and Costello meet Frankenstein where it was a comedy but Frankenstein's monster was very real. It wasn't like played campy or jokey. He was very serious, and so he kind of wanted to inject that into his film. And he said that when actors came in to audition for Dracula, if they had that kind of campy John Waters feel, he just like thanks for coming in, see you later. So let me start with you and saying like, when did you hear? Was this a project your agent brought to you? Was this something you heard about? Like, how did you get involved with actually auditioning for the Monster Squad?
Well, I came through my manager, I think, at the time. Yeah, I mean, it's a long time ago, so it's hard to remember exactly how it may have arrived, but I believe that's what it was. And said, "Do you want to go in for this?" And sure, Dracula. Are you kidding? Of course.
What
So
do what do you remember about that audition process? Because like I said, obviously there's a lot of people. It's an audition, so there's a lot of people trying to. And I love what he said about that. He said anyone that kind of had a certain take on it, he just he wasn't interested in that. He wanted a very serious take. So when you went in, obviously you nailed it. He said when you showed up, he just knew you were Dracula. So what do you remember about that audition?
I actually remember quite a lengthy audition sort of process, and I think there were other contenders who were going in and out and visiting the offices and sitting down and talking with him, and he was very serious about what he wanted. And my approach to the character was actually a little bit different from his, and I was persistent with it. Um, And I explained it fully, I think, and he went with it ultimately. He and Peter Hyams and the other producers and what have you felt that, like it sort of had something that worked for it. True evil, if you will.
Yeah. Well, I think that like that shows through so much of the performance. Now, can I ask you one of those like weird internet questions that gets out there? Because you read a lot of things about films, you see the documentaries. I saw a million rumors that basically it was down to you and Liam Neeson. Is that true? Liam Neeson auditioned for that role. Did you ever hear about that?
I heard about that too. Yes, I think he was going in. Yeah, he's a marvelous actor. He's one of my favorite actors, actually. Um, yeah, I guess so. I've heard all of the rumors too.
Yeah.
Um, so
Yeah.
I
Now
never,
you
I met him once, but I've never really asked him about that. I mean, just said
yeah,
hello. You know,
yeah. I was always curious. I was like, I mean, listen, I couldn't imagine anyone else being in that role, but I mean, listen, Liam's an incredible actor in his own right. With that
yeah,
being said, obviously, when you do a character like Dracula, there's a lot of interpretations out there. Bela Lugosi, very famously, of course, so iconic. Of course, Christopher Lee
right,
did his versions of the Hammer films,
right.
but your performance was so to me wildly different than anything I had seen out of a Dracula character before. How much did you look at those past performances and either not allow them to influence you or to influence you? Because I'm curious, because there's so many different interpretations of Dracula. It's such a famous character, has been in film for over 100 years.
Well, I think that the project came with certain parameters. I knew that it had to have a sort of an iconic quality that related to previous Draculas, particularly the Bela Lugosi ones and the stuff that he did, costume, etc., that sort of thing, bearing. It had to have that attached to it. But to appeal to that back then contemporary audience, and I suppose today it's contemporary audience, but back then I wanted to apply a lot more human characteristics to it in the sense of him being sociopathic rather than just bestial and monstrous and slavering and biting people's necks, that sort of thing. That we have enough of that. And I thought, well, we'll try to put more of a psychological spin on it, and in a limited sort of way, humor. To take the edge off whatever his dire actions were, um, and to make it lighter, because it is kind of lighthearted and family oriented and that sort of thing. So there were all those components that I was juggling. Plus, as I say, you had to have that iconic stature to it, a bit of grace to it, and yeah, that's how I kind of went after it. It just sort of evolved that way. And plus, I like to approach a lot of roles. I'm an artist, so I paint a lot, and I approach a lot of my roles and characters by making drawings and experimenting with what comes from the drawing to me as a way of suggesting to convey it as an actor.
Yeah.
And all my work.
Do you remember the first costume fitting when you first got in the outfit and actually got the makeup and everything done? Because like you get the fangs in, the contacts, the hair slicked back. Like, do you remember that moment, like when you officially became Dracula? Because you can audition, you're going through the whole process, but when you're like first day of filming, I mean, that's got to be cool because you're in the outfit. I mean, you didn't have to go quite through what I think it was Tom Woodruff Jr. did. He did the Gill Man where they talked about they had to glue him in the suit. Like you didn't have to go through quite the process.
No,
but...
I know that was the nice thing about that character, was that I didn't have to put up with all of the heavy makeups. Well, in a few places I did. There were, contacts and, a little bit of that sort of thing. But uh, I just remember that it comes to life. You inhabit the costume, you inhabit the character. And I don't remember a specific moment, but I know that's how it kind of came about. You suddenly stand there and you feel the character. You are the you embody it, or it embodies you, if you like. It happens that way. And so I always felt
There
that he was
was
sailing along. He just sort of breeze into a place, glide in, and take
yeah.
over.
Absolutely, absolutely. The way I describe the performance is deliciously evil. That's the way I've always described the
Yeah,
performance because
way to describe it. Yeah, yeah.
It, but
TV.
what I loved about it also was because when obviously I saw it originally as a kid growing up. I went to the
Yeah,
video store, rented the VHS, and watched it, and then wore out the VHS because I'd watched it so many times. But kids films, kids horror films at that time, there was always a little tongue in cheek there, right? Like even like a film that comes up a lot with Monster Squad is Goonies, of course,
sure.
and even the villains. And I think Anne Ramsey, the other characters, obviously Joe Pantoliano, the characters, the bad guys in that film. They're kind of, it's kind of like over the top, little comedy, little goofy, you know what I mean? So there's, you never feel like the kids are truly in danger, if that makes sense. Like it was always kind
Yeah,
of campy and kind of goofy, and the villains were not truly like, evil.
right.
When I watched Monster Squad and your performance of Dracula, I was terrified. Like that was like the scariest version of a horror film I had seen at that point, because I was like, this doesn't happen in kids' films. These are kids who are 12 years old and they're being attacked by Dracula. Like that, I imagine that's a big part of what makes this film work so well, is that it actually is scary for kids.
Yeah, it is. It is, I guess. I mean, and I think, going back to the audition process, I think that's probably what sold it. They decided, this guy's reached into the diabolical, and that's who he is. Totally evil. But yeah, and I think, also working at that time when, Andre and the rest of the children, they were children, there was still an innocence to them that I don't think exists today. Kids are inundated, got social media and, all the, information from the internet. It's all expanded. And I think back then there was an innocence to it. So when the kids were frightened, acting frightened, they were actually frightened. And I think children can relate to the truth of that. I don't think they know when they're being faked out. They can feel it. They actually feel it. Because those kids, well, as little actors, really were frightened at times, especially Phoebe.
I want to get to that particular scene in just a second, but can I ask you, because watching the documentary and you were talking about, I want to get to that scene in particular. We're going to talk about Phoebe, but how much, like, when you were on set, because I hear this all the time in a lot of movies, that when you're playing a certain character, you don't like they don't want to interact with the, like, especially in horror films, like they don't want you to see them. They want your reaction to be natural when you see them in the costume the first time, or when they're trying to scare you. They don't want to be around you. They want to have a genuine, like, I know that I think Jodie Foster said, like, she never met or interacted with Anthony Hopkins at all when they were filming Silence of the Lambs, because he wanted to genuinely, like, terrify her when they were interacting, and then obviously they became friends afterwards. Did you interact with the kids, like, before filming? Did you try to stay separate? Like, how was it?
No, they terrified me. So no, no, I think, and that was kind of the approach I took to it, was that they would feel very much more frightened by that. It worked. I think with Frankie, the character of Frankie, he sort of took a different approach and maybe sort of reached out to them. He wasn't going to frighten them. He had to be empathetic and sort of, was involved with them. But no, definitely, I stayed away from them.
Yeah. Now
Yeah.
the scene, of course, the scene with Phoebe, the famous scene lifting her in the air, and I don't want to just retell what was said in the documentary, but that was this. And I know it's towards the tail end of the movie, but that's my favorite line in the movie, my favorite moment in the movie, because that was the moment where I was like, this is real. Like, these kids are in peril, danger at this moment, because you generally don't see a little kid like that. Even the older kids, when they were 12, 13 years old, even they, you don't see a 5-year-old girl lifted in the air and have that moment happen. That to me is my most iconic moment of that film. That's the one that always stands out to me. I have stickers on my laptop of that particular moment in the film. What do you remember? Like, because I think you said in the documentary, like, Ashley, the actress, like, she had no idea what you were going to say to her. Is that right? Like, am I getting that right?
Oh yeah, I don't think she did at all. She had no idea what was going to happen. And could she scream? Oh, God. As I say, I was terrified too. I was terrified of whatever it was that I was doing was frightening me.
Yeah.
I think, and certainly terrified her. Yeah. It was very
it's
powerful,
a
but give me the amulet, you bitch, is not, today is really, it's nothing. But back then, wow, that was powerful.
that that's the one because I'm thinking, and just to being honest, like when you say bitch, like in the little kid, I was like, oh my god, this guy's gonna kill her. Like that was like this
Sure.
most terror. You just never see it coming, and I was like, that is the most iconic line in that film, and that's the one that always scares me. Because again, and I'm curious because I saw when you said like she screamed like the first time she did it, they said she screamed and like almost went silent because she was so scared. And they had to redo it to get her a better scream. Was that right?
I don't actually remember that. I don't recall that, but it's a long time ago. Um, yeah, I mean, I guess we did it a couple of times. It's all a bit of a blur.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Afterward, like in that moment, because again, this is all genuine. I think I saw it when Fred said in the documentary, he said, she's like, when do I scream? And he said, you'll know. You'll know when to scream. And certainly she did because that was terrifying. After you cut, after it's all over, in that moment, are you like giving her a hug? Like, are you okay? Because I mean, that would as a kid, like even as an actor, like she's not screaming because she obviously she's acting screaming, but she was terrified at that moment.
Yeah, sure. Well, yeah, we all kind of looked after her afterwards, but I think she was pretty wary of me for a long time.
There, that entire process, and it did seem like everyone really enjoyed making the film, and I know everyone that I've seen in Aftermath say that was one of their favorite experiences. How was it like looking back on it now in terms of just like you've done a lot of things, I mean, obviously not too long after this, you did Zorro, you did all these other things you've done. So I don't want you to rate your favorite performances, but looking back at that, like how was that overall experience? Did you have fun? Did you enjoy it? Because you're playing such an iconic character, but you're a serious actor, so you're taking it seriously. So how much do you remember? Like how much did you enjoy that entire process of
Oh
making
no,
that?
I loved it as much as any other role. I just and I do it again in a heartbeat, but I do it different, of course. Um, yeah, I loved it. It was good fun. Yeah, I mean, what's not to like? It was it was an experience, and I mean, there were challenges certainly within it, working challenges that were difficulties, but and there always are. But it's part of the overall experience. It's not just a joyride. It's work, and everybody kind of pulls together regardless of whether they have different opinions about things or not. They try to pull together, and it makes it work. And sometimes those different opinions create a dynamic out of it, and it propels it forward even more.
I know you've been told this, and I said at the top of the interview, and I'm not, I'm sure it, you hear this, and I know what your reaction probably will be, but again, there are a lot of iconic performances of Dracula. It's such a famous character. Everyone brings up Bela Lugosi, of course. It's an iconic performance.
Yeah.
I love Christopher Lee as well, but. And I'm saying this not just because I'm talking to you. We've actually done podcasts in the past where we've done our favorite, our favorite villains, favorite things like that, and without even preparing for it, my favorite performance of all time of Dracula is yours. That to me is the most iconic, best performance.
Flattered,
Like,
deeply flattered. Thank you.
do you appreciate? And I know there's been rankings and all this kind of stuff out there, but like that one performance, it seems like that always comes up again. Do you appreciate that? Like even all these years later, that people like myself, like to me, you are Dracula. Like your performance, like I love Bela Lugosi. I don't want to knock what anyone else has done, but when I think of my favorite Dracula, it is Duncan Regehr's Dracula.
Well, I am deeply flattered, and I'm flattered to even be on the list of ranking, with people like Bela Lugosi and Christopher Lee. I mean, come on, they're iconic in themselves as actors.
Yeah. And as I said earlier, this performance kind of lives on forever. Obviously, I know you do appearances. You have some conventions coming up. I'm going to mention those in just a second. When you meet fans, because obviously you're going to meet fans who saw it when they were kids,
Yeah.
when it came out in 1987. But you mentioned like they're kids of this generation. Like my co-host, who unfortunately couldn't be here today, he had to work. He has kids who are like 9 and 8 years old, and they saw Monster Squad, and they freaking loved it. They absolutely loved it. And of course, they're 9 and 8 years old. Is it wild when you go to these conventions and you meet people like generational fans, like people who were kids in '87 and now they have kids, or as you said, grandkids who are watching Monster Squad in 2024 and loving it just the same as we did when we were kids?
Yeah. No, it's fabulous to to be in contact with that. That's the thing that I really like about those conventions, is when whole families come up and you get to meet the kids, and the kids are always, they're really not sure who I am. They've seen the movie, and I don't look anything like I did in the movie, and it's so long ago, and I look like Dracula's grandfather now. Yeah.
You might have to hiss at them one time, and they'll figure out real quick who you are.
Oh yeah. Oh sure. Yeah. There you go.
So obviously, and I'm curious because let me just mention. Obviously, you have a couple things coming up here that you're going to be making some appearances at. And I want to mention those in August 9th through 11th. New Jersey Horror Con and Film Festival, New Jersey Expo Center in Edison, New Jersey, and then GalaxyCon Nightmare Weekend, Des Moines, Iowa, September 27th through the 29th, and GalaxyCon Richmond, Virginia, October 11th through the 13th. Now, I know when you do these appearances, there's always, they do a lot. Like, I assume you still see a lot of the cast members when you do these appearances, like whoever's going to be there.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I think, Ashley Banks is going to be there, and, Stephen Macht, and, all of them, Michael.
Yeah. Is it fun to, listen, when you do an interview like this, of course you're going to look back and talk about it, but I assume that when you see all those folks, it's still fun to reminisce and be together all these years later. Like, again, when I watched that documentary, it was just so fun to see everyone back together again, like seeing everybody, when they did the tour for the anniversary and everything. So I imagine when you run into everybody, it's almost like family in a way. Like, these are people you've shared a lot of experiences with.
A little bit, but that family has sort of formed since Monster Squad. We didn't really, hang out or socialize during the filming of it. But over the years, we've run into each other enough times that we can now say, well, how's the family? What's your husband up to these days? Or how are the kids? So yeah. And of course, you do socialize when you're at these conventions with your friends, and so it's become like a big family.
Let me ask you, the influence of this film, and again, I'm not even sure how much you even pay attention to things like this, but like there are projects now. One in particular I always bring up is Stranger Things, huge show on Netflix, massive success. And I've said this to many people when I've done interviews and I've talked to cast members. I say, I don't think Stranger Things exists without Monster Squad, because I think their take on it is being more serious with like the villains and no campiness, no that feeling. And then the kids, kind of arming themselves up and teaming up to go against the bad guys. Do you feel that influence? Again, I don't even know how much you're seeing these projects out there, but like, I feel like this is one of the most influential movies because it has stuck with people for so long. Like, here I am, we did our 200th episode. I was like, yeah, we got to do Monster Squad. Like, of course we got to do Monster Squad. Do you still see that? I still see that influence out there constantly.
Oh yeah, I think it is the way we roll forward. There's kind of a DNA that starts to, if you will, it's sort of definitely the influences are there from projects like this. Always influenced by copying necessarily. It's just that there's a sense that it's there, that it's this is what it is. It's not that you even have to dissect it or deconstruct it in any way. It's just there. Yeah, I think absolutely that you're right.
I'm going to ask you one last question. I almost fear putting this out in the universe, but I'm going to say it anyways because I know this is going to come up at some point. We're in an age now where everything gets rebooted, remade, rehashed, however you want to say it. And I've always lived in fear that someone would try to remake Monster Squad because it is such an iconic film. How would you feel about that if someone ever tried to take a stab at that and tried to remake that film or reboot that film, whatever it was? Like, unless the original cast was somehow involved, that would be the only way I'd want it to happen. How would you feel about that? Because we do live in that era where, I mean, again, Dracula's a character that's been around for years. There's probably hundreds of interpretations of Dracula between TV and film. But how would you feel about that? Because we live in that world now where it just happens.
Yeah, sure. But I mean, I think it relates back to what you were saying before about, and what I was saying about influence and DNA. Yes, Monster Squad has been remade in another way many, many times. But what's the point? Why would you remake a classic like this? I don't know. I don't know that it would be, well, you would definitely have better special effects, what have you. Perhaps a different storyline. They would have the hero would be a girl this time. That's contemporary, probably. So it would
Yeah.
be a little different.
Yeah. I just hope it never. I hope it never happens myself. I hope it never happens.
The thing is, and making it different, then it isn't like the original Monster Squad. It's something different. It will have to be something different. There's no point in just remaking it and trying to make it exactly like the old Monster Squad, because that's what you already have, right? It's kind of like, why would you? But if they did remake it and I was going to be a part of it, I'd be delighted.
Yeah, that would be the only way. If you come back, if some of the cast comes back, that would be the only way I would be interested in that film. That would be now that would get me interested.
Yeah, me too.
Real quick before I let you go, Duncan, beyond your acting career, I know you're also an artist, and I've seen some of your work. I was a bit of an amateur. Actually, I started in college in art, and then I realized, wow, I'm not nearly as good as these other artists, and so I switched to English literature. When I was in college, became a writer instead of an artist. But you're incredible. Can I ask, like, what kind of mediums do you like to work with? Is it oil painting? Like, what kind of mediums do you like to work with in your?
Well, I use everything. I mean, over the years, is a career of well over 50 years now. It's everything. I mean, I'm currently working with oil and acrylic, and everything, just all kinds of mediums, and fairly large pieces. I'm working on over the last decade. I've been putting together a series of works under the title of The Journey, and it deals with a series called Pilgrim, a series called Quest series, Once Were Angels series, which is what I'm working on right now, and another book that will encapsulate all of this stuff, and just doing exhibitions of my work as well everywhere. So
Amazing.
Yeah, it's just it's a way of life, and that's what I do.
I always marvel at painters in particular, because that was when I wanted to draw, when I tried to be artist, I was mostly with pencils and that kind of art. I always marveled at painters though, because I could never get what was in my head onto a canvas, and I always marvel at painters who can do that. And I saw your work; you do some incredible work, and I always envy that, because I'm like, man, it's just so amazing that you can take that image in your head and put it on canvas. If it wasn't a pencil, I could just never do it.
I mean, for me, sometimes I don't even know what's in my head or what I'm feeling until I pick up a pencil or a brush and just ask, let's go, whatever. And it starts to come out. And then almost in spite of me, something arrives, and then I know what to do. I follow it rather than direct it. In other words, that means you let go of it. And quite often, whatever is, swirling around in your subconscious will come out if you let it. Will tell you what you want to do.
I love it.
It's just a way of working.
Yeah, incredible. Well, Duncan, I can't say thank you again so much for carving out some time for me. I really do appreciate it. It means so much to us. We are obviously such huge fans of the movie and the film and all your work, of course. It's funny, when I was a kid, before the internet was the internet, I remember watching the Monster Squad and then watching Zorro and then watching Star Trek. I was like, hey, I know that guy. That was before IMDb existed, and I could say, oh, that's of course that's Duncan Regehr. But now, like looking back, I remember watching those shows and be like, hey, it's Dracula. He's in another thing. So I've been a fan of yours for many, many years. It really does mean a lot to have you on for this, for our special 200th episode. And thank you so much for taking the time. We really do appreciate it. It's
been
an
a pleasure,
honor.
and I'm very flattered that you've had me. Thank you. Really,
thank you so much.
Fun.
Hopefully we can. Hopefully we'll catch each other on a convention one of these days.
Sounds good. I look forward to meeting you in person.
All right. Thank you so much again, Duncan.
Cheers, mate.
Bye-bye.
Bye now.